The moment Layla adjusted her necklace for the third time in under a minute, I knew our lives were about to shatter. Her fingers trembled, betraying the mask of calm she wore, and the air in the room felt like it was holding its breath. The grand estate on the outskirts of Seattle buzzed with the laughter of guests, their champagne glasses catching the glow of crystal chandeliers, oblivious to the storm brewing at the heart of our 30th wedding anniversary. I stood at the head of the banquet hall, a glass of whiskey in one hand, a folded speech in the other. 30 years of marriage, 3 decades of late-night talks, shared dreams, and sacrifices distilled into a few paragraphs about love, loyalty, and the life we'd built. Our daughter, Emily, 29 and radiant in a tailored black dress, laughed near the bar with a friend, her architect's poise masking the weight of the moment she didn't yet know was coming. The jazz quartet played softly, their notes weaving through the hum of conversation, and the scent of cedar from the nearby fireplace mingled with the crisp Seattle evening air drifting through open windows. Layla stood beside me, her emerald gown shimmering under the lights, but her eyes darted everywhere except to mine. She adjusted her necklace again, a delicate silver chain with a pendant I'd given her on our 10th anniversary, and I felt a familiar pang in my chest. It wasn't just nerves. It was calculation, the kind she used when she was about to rewrite the rules of our world. I'd seen it before, when she convinced me to take a second mortgage for Emily's college fund, or when she smoothed over a fight with a smile that promised everything would be fine. But tonight, that smile was brittle, like glass one tap away from cracking. The guests, a mix of old friends, neighbors, and Emily's colleagues, filled the hall with warmth. They toasted to us, their glasses raised in anticipation of my speech, their faces glowing with the kind of nostalgia that only milestone celebrations bring. I cleared my throat, ready to begin, but Layla's hand shot out, her fingers brushing my wrist. "Thomas, wait," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble but sharp enough to cut through the room's hum. The quartet faltered, a single off-key note hanging in the air, and every eye turned to us. The silence was instant, heavy, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Layla stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor, and faced the crowd. Her posture was perfect, her chin lifted, but her fingers betrayed her again, twitching at the necklace. "Before Thomas speaks," she said, her tone rehearsed, "there's something I need to share." She paused, letting the words settle, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me, not from shock but from clarity. This was no spontaneous confession. This was a performance she'd planned down to the second. Her gaze flicked to the far corner of the room, where a man stood alone, his gray suit tailored to a frame that carried the confidence of someone used to being noticed. He was tall, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it had been smoothed by time and charm. He held a tumbler, sipping slowly, his eyes fixed on Layla with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. "That's Victor," she said, her voice steady now, almost proud. "He's Emily's biological father, and he's here to celebrate with us tonight." A glass shattered somewhere in the room, the sound slicing through the stunned silence. Emily froze mid-step, her smile dissolving like mist in sunlight. Her friend at the bar gasped, and a murmur rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then louder, like the hum of a hive waking up. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My fingers tightened around the whiskey glass, but my face remained calm, a mask I'd perfected over years of quiet observation. Layla's hand lingered on my wrist, as if she expected me to collapse or explode, but I just stood there, letting her words echo in the hollow space where trust used to live. Emily's eyes darted between her mother and the stranger in the corner. "Mom, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice thin, cracking at the edges. She took a step forward, her heels unsteady on the hardwood, and the room seemed to lean in, every guest holding their breath, waiting for the next act in a drama they hadn't signed up for. Layla turned to her, that brittle smile still in place, and said, "Emily, sweetheart, It's time you knew the truth. You're an adult now. You deserve to know who your real father is. The word real hit like a slap. Emily's face paled, her hands clenching at her sides, and I saw the lawyer in her. The one who'd spent years designing buildings that wouldn't crumble, struggling to hold herself together. She didn't look at me. Not yet. But I could feel her world shifting, the foundation of her life cracking under the weight of her mother's words. The guests were no longer toasting. They were spectators now, their whispers growing bolder, their eyes flicking from Layla to Victor to me, waiting for the explosion they were sure would come. Victor, for his part, didn't move. He stood in his corner, tumbler in hand, his posture relaxed but his eyes cautious, like a man who knew he'd just stepped into a minefield. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched, as if he'd rehearsed this moment as carefully as Layla had. I studied him, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint smirk he couldn't quite hide, and a memory stirred, distant, hazy, but sharp enough to cut. I'd met him before, decades ago, when he was just a charming drifter passing through our lives. Back then, Layla had called him an old college friend. I'd believed her. I'd had no reason not to. But now, as I stood in the wreckage of her confession, I saw the truth in the details I'd ignored. The way her perfume was stronger tonight, a scent she hadn't worn in years. The way her necklace gleamed, not with sentiment but with intent, a prop in her carefully staged reveal. The way the playlist had shifted last minute, softer songs replaced with something bolder, as if she'd curated the soundtrack to her own bombshell. These weren't accidents. They were moves in a game she thought she'd already won. I folded my speech, tucking it back into my jacket pocket. The words I'd written about love, about legacy, felt like relics from a life that no longer existed. Layla took a step back, her eyes searching mine, expecting rage, tears, maybe a shouted accusation. But I didn't give her that. I smiled, just enough to make her falter, and raised my glass slightly. "Well," I said, my voice low but clear, "isn't that something?" The room held its breath as Layla's words hung like smoke, thick and suffocating. Emily's question, "Mom, what are you saying?" still echoed, unanswered, in the tense air of the Seattle estate. I stood motionless, my whiskey glass cool against my palm, watching the cracks spread through the facade of our perfect life. The guests, frozen in their elegant attire, were no longer celebrating. They were witnesses to a drama unfolding with surgical precision. Emily stepped closer to her mother, her architect's composure fraying at the edges. Her voice was sharp now, cutting through the murmurs. "You're saying Dad isn't my father?" "That he is." She jabbed a finger toward Victor, who lingered in the corner, his tumbler now set down, his hands fidgeting like a man caught in a lie he hadn't prepared for. Layla's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her tone soft, almost maternal. "Emily, I didn't want to hurt you. I thought it was time for the truth. Victor and we were young and things were complicated back then." Complicated. Emily's laugh was bitter, a sound I hadn't heard from her since her teenage years. "You lied to me my entire life, and you call it complicated? You picked tonight, our family's night, to drop this." Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked to me for the first time, searching for an anchor. I gave her a small nod, steady, silent, letting her know I was still her father, no matter what venom Layla spilled. The crowd stirred, whispers growing bolder. A woman near the fireplace clutched her wineglass tighter, her husband muttering something under his breath. Another guest, an old neighbor, coughed awkwardly, as if trying to dispel the tension. But it was no use. Layla's confession had gutted the room, stripping away the warmth of the chandeliers and the cedar-scented air. Even the jazz quartet had stopped, their instruments silent, as if they, too, were stunned by the betrayal. Layla took a step toward Emily, her hands outstretched, but Emily recoiled, her arms crossing like a shield. "Don't," she said, her voice low but lethal. You don't get to play the caring mom now. Not after this. Layla's face tightened, her necklace glinting as she straightened, trying to salvage her performance. I protected you, she said, her words rehearsed, polished. We weren't sure back then. There were questions. I did what I thought was best. I nearly laughed into my glass. We weren't sure. The lie was so smooth it could have been bottled and sold. I remembered the night I'd asked her, point blank, if Emily was mine. We were in our old apartment, the one with the leaky faucet, Emily barely a month old. Layla had looked me in the eye, her voice steady, and sworn there was no doubt. I'd believed her because I loved her, because trust was the currency we traded in back then. Now, standing in this gilded hall, I saw that trust for what it was. A fiction she'd crafted to keep me in the dark. Emily's head tilted, her lawyer's mind kicking in despite the emotional whiplash. Did he know? She asked, her gaze locking on Victor. The man shifted, his polished exterior cracking. He cleared his throat, his voice damp with caution. We spoke recently, he admitted, glancing at Layla as if for rescue. She said it was time, that you deserved clarity. Clarity? Emily's voice rose, sharp enough to make a few guests flinch. You two talk about my life like it's a puzzle you get to solve. I had clarity. I had Dad. She turned to me then, her eyes softening for a split second, and I saw the little girl who'd clung to me during stormy nights, the one who'd drawn houses on napkins and called me her hero. I nodded again, my jaw tight, and she drew strength from it, turning back to Layla. So what's the plan? I call him Dad now? Invite him to Thanksgiving like this is some cheesy movie? Layla's composure slipped further, her hands clasping together as if to steady herself. That's not fair, Emily. I just wanted. No. Emily cut her off, her voice ablade. What's not fair is you ripping my life apart because you decided to clear your conscience before dessert. This isn't about me. This is about you. The room was silent now, the kind of quiet that follows a thunderclap. A few guests shuffled toward the exits, murmuring about coats or restrooms, but most stayed, their eyes glued to the unraveling of our family. I set my glass down, the soft clink louder than it should have been. Layla thought she'd played her trump card, but she hadn't seen my hand. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope, its edges worn from years of careful handling. The crowd inhaled collectively, sensing the shift. Layla's eyes widened, her fingers freezing mid-fidget. Thomas? She began, her voice thin. What is that? I smiled. Not with warmth, but with the calm of a man who'd spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Since we're airing truths tonight, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the hall, I figured I'd share one of my own. I tapped the envelope against my palm, letting the weight of it speak for itself. You see, Layla, I've known about Victor since Emily was a toddler. I didn't stay quiet because I was blind. I stayed quiet because I chose to be her father. Emily's breath caught, her eyes locking on mine, a mix of shock and gratitude flickering across her face. The guests leaned in, their whispers dying out, and even Victor looked up, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. I turned to Layla, meeting her gaze fully for the first time that night. But there's more, I said, my tone light but lethal. And I'd bet good money you didn't tell Victor everything either. Layla's face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of a nearby table. For the first time, she looked like a chess player who'd just realized her opponent had been planning checkmate all along. I didn't open the envelope, not yet. I let it sit there, a silent promise of truths she hadn't anticipated. The room was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom, and I was about to call my first witness. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than the silence that gripped the Seattle estate. Layla's eyes were locked on it, her knuckles white against the table, as if she could will it to disappear. The guests, once buoyant with champagne and nostalgia, now stood like statues, their whispers replaced by a tense anticipation that made the air feel brittle. Emily, still reeling from her mother's betrayal, looked at me, her gaze a mix of hope and dread, silently urging me to make sense of the chaos Layla had unleashed. I tapped the envelope once, twice, letting the soft thud echo in the quiet hall. "You thought you'd control the narrative tonight, didn't you, Layla?" I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her facade. "You planned this moment, rehearsed it, timed it to the second. But you forgot one thing." I paused, meeting her eyes, watching the flicker of panic she couldn't hide. "I've been paying attention for 30 years. Layla opened her mouth, but no words came. Her necklace gleamed under the chandelier's light, a cruel reminder of the trust I'd once placed in her. I turned to the crowd, my movements deliberate, holding the envelope like a judge presenting evidence. "I knew about Victor before Emily could walk," I said, my tone steady, unyielding. "Not because Layla told me, because I saw the cracks she thought she'd hidden." Emily stepped closer, her arms uncrossing, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, what do you mean?" The word, Dad, hit me like a lifeline, grounding me in the storm. I gave her a small, reassuring nod before continuing. "When you were born, Emily, I asked your mother if you were mine. She swore you were, looked me in the eye and promised. But there were things that didn't add up. Late-night calls she brushed off. A man's jacket in our closet she said belonged to a cousin. A bank withdrawal she couldn't explain." Layla's face crumpled, her composure shattering like glass. "Thomas, stop," she pleaded, her voice thin, desperate. "This isn't the place." I raised a brow, my smile cold. "You chose the place, Layla. You invited 50 witnesses to your truth. Now they get to hear mine." I opened the envelope, pulling out a single yellowed sheet, its edges frayed from years of careful preservation. "This," I said, holding it up for the room to see, "is a bank record from 1994, the year after Emily was born. A transfer of $5,000 from our joint account to an R. Caldwell. Care to guess who that is?" I glanced at Victor, who was no longer leaning casually against the wall. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes darting toward the exit like a man measuring his escape. The crowd murmured, heads turning toward Victor, who cleared his throat, his voice weak. "That's not. I don't know what you're implying, Thomas." I didn't let him finish. "Don't," I said, my tone low, final. "You don't get to rewrite this one." I pulled another document, a photocopy of a handwritten note, and read aloud, "I'll be gone by spring. Tell him it's over and I'm out. I can't do this family thing. Signed, Victor, April 1994. Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth, and the room seemed to tilt. A woman near the bar whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough to carry. Layla stumbled back, catching herself on a chair, her face ashen. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left it in a box in the attic," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. "Tucked inside an old novel you thought I'd never read. You should have burned it, Layla." I turned to Emily, softening my tone. "I found this when you were 3. I could have confronted her then, could have walked away. But I looked at you, at the way you laughed, the way you trusted me, and I chose you. I chose to be your father, no matter what blood said." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away, her jaw set with a strength I'd always admired. The guests were no longer spectators. They were jurors, their faces a mix of shock and judgment. Victor shifted, his polished exterior crumbling. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction, and no one was listening. I pulled another sheet from the envelope, this one a typed report, its edges crisp despite its age. "Victor didn't just break promises," I said, my voice rising slightly. "He broke lives. This is a private investigator's report from 1995. Victor Caldwell, alias Robert Crane, conned 4 families in Seattle. Fake investments, empty promises, thousands of dollars gone. He used charm to get close, then vanished when the checks cleared. The crowd erupted in murmurs, heads swiveling toward Victor, who looked like he'd been punched. "That's a lie," he snapped, but his voice cracked, and sweat beaded on his forehead. I held up the report, letting the names speak for themselves. Lorraine Myers, widowed teacher. Edward Holt, retired mechanic. They trusted you, Victor, just like Layla did. Layla's knees buckled, and she sank into the chair, her hands trembling. "You told me none of that was true," she whispered. Her eyes locked on Victor, searching for a lifeline. He avoided her gaze, his hands clenching in his lap, and in that moment, I saw the truth hit her. She wasn't the mastermind of this night. She was another mark in Victor's long game. Emily stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "You knew about this?" she asked her mother, her eyes blazing. "You brought him here, knowing what he was?" Layla shook her head, her voice breaking. "I didn't. He said he'd changed. He said he wanted to know you." Emily's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Know me? Or use me? I saw the messages, Mom. He asked about my firm, my clients. He didn't come for me. He came for what I've built." The room was a pressure cooker now, the air thick with betrayal. A few guests slipped out, their footsteps soft on the hardwood, but most stayed, their eyes darting between us like they were watching a trial unfold. I set the envelope down, its contents laid bare, and looked at Layla. "You thought you'd rewrite our history tonight," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "But you didn't know I'd been writing my own." Layla stared at the table, her hands limp, her necklace no longer a prop but a weight. Victor was silent, his head bowed, a man exposed. Emily stood beside me, her presence a silent vow, and I felt the first stirrings of freedom. Not from rage, but from the truth I'd carried for decades. The gala was no longer a celebration. It was a reckoning, and I wasn't done yet. The Seattle estate was no longer a haven of celebration. It was a stage where masks had been torn away, leaving raw truths exposed under the harsh glow of chandeliers. Emily's words, "He didn't come for me. He came for what I've built," still rang in the air, sharp and final, as Layla sat slumped in her chair, her emerald gown pooling around her like a fallen curtain. Victor, cornered by the weight of my evidence, looked smaller now, his silver hair no longer a crown of charm but a marker of a man out of moves. The guests, their faces a mix of shock and unease, stood frozen, caught in the gravity of a family unraveling before their eyes. Emily turned to her mother, her architect's precision giving way to a daughter's fury. "You let him back into our lives," she said, her voice trembling but controlled, each word a hammer strike. "You knew what he was, and you still invited him here. Why? To hurt Dad? To hurt me?" Layla's head snapped up, her eyes wide, pleading. "No, Emily, I swear, I thought—" She stopped, her hands twisting in her lap, as if the right words could stitch her world back together. But there were no right words, not anymore. "You thought what?" Emily pressed, stepping closer, her heels clicking like a countdown. "That I'd welcome him? That I'd thank you for lying to me for 29 years. Her voice cracked, and I saw the little girl who'd once cried when her kite got stuck in a tree, the one I'd promised to always fix things for. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her away from this mess, but she needed to face it, to carve her own path through the wreckage. Layla's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. I thought he'd changed. He told me he wanted a chance to know you, to make things right." She glanced at Victor, desperation in her eyes, but he wouldn't meet her gaze. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders hunched, a man trying to disappear without moving. "He lied to me," Layla whispered, more to herself than to Emily. Again, I let out a low chuckle, not out of amusement but from the irony that had been simmering for decades. He lied to you, Layla? That's rich. I leaned against the table, the envelope's contents still scattered like shrapnel from a long-buried bomb. You built a life on lies. You lied to me about Emily. You lied to her about her father. And now you're surprised that your partner in the charade played you, too. Layla's head jerked toward me, her eyes flashing with a mix of guilt and defiance. You don't understand, Thomas. I was protecting our family. I was protecting her. She gestured toward Emily, but the motion was weak, unconvincing. Emily shook her head, her voice cold. Protecting me? You used me to rewrite your story. You wanted to play the hero, the brave mother revealing the truth. But this wasn't for me. This was for you. The crowd was quieter now, their initial shock settling into a heavy discomfort. A few guests averted their eyes, pretending to study their drinks, but others leaned in, unable to look away from the raw honesty of the moment. The jazz quartet remained silent, their instruments abandoned, and the fireplace's crackle was the only sound competing with our voices. I caught a glimpse of an old friend near the bar, her hand over her mouth, as if she could trap the scandal before it spread. I straightened, my gaze shifting to Victor, who was still avoiding everyone's eyes. You thought you could waltz back in, didn't you? I said, my tone low, deliberate. Charm your way into Emily's life, maybe her bank account, like you did with those families in '95? His head snapped up, his face pale, but he didn't speak. I didn't need him to. The evidence spoke for itself, and Emily's discovery of his messages. His inquiries about her firm, her success, had already sealed his fate. Emily turned to him, her eyes blazing. I found your emails, Victor. You didn't ask about me, my life, my dreams. You asked about my clients, my projects. You saw my name in the papers and thought you could cash in on my success. Her voice broke, but she held her ground, her strength a mirror of the woman she'd become. You abandoned me before I was born, and now you think a glass of whiskey and a fake smile make you a father? Victor finally spoke, his voice hoarse, unsteady. I just wanted a chance. I didn't mean. He stopped, his words crumbling under the weight of his own lies. Emily shook her head, her laugh bitter. You didn't mean to get caught. She turned away from him, her shoulders squared, and stood beside me, her presence a quiet declaration of where her loyalty lay. Layla's face contorted, a mix of grief and realization. She looked at Victor, her voice rising, raw and guttural. You used me. You said we could start over, that Emily would understand. You said Thomas was too weak to fight back. The room gasped, the admission slicing through the air like a blade. I didn't flinch. I'd known her betrayal ran deep, but hearing it aloud, in front of everyone, was a strange kind of validation. Victor reached out, a feeble attempt at damage control. Layla, I didn't. She jerked away, her voice a snarl. Don't touch me. You used us both, just like you always have. Her hands shook, her necklace catching the light as she turned to Emily, her eyes pleading. Emily, please. I didn't know he was like this. I thought I was doing the right thing. Emily's expression was stone, her voice steady. You don't get to be the victim. Not after what you did to Dad. To me. She paused, her eyes softening as she looked at me. Dad raised me. He stayed. He chose me. You chose your lies. Layla flinched, her body curling inward, as if Emily's words were physical blows. The guests were silent, their judgment palpable, and for the first time, Layla seemed to feel the weight of their stares. I stepped forward, my voice calm but unyielding. You thought you'd rewrite our history, Layla, but you didn't count on me keeping receipts. I gestured to the scattered documents, the evidence of Victor's cons and Layla's complicity. You brought him here to hurt me, to take control. But you didn't just betray me. You betrayed her. I nodded toward Emily, who stood tall beside me, her eyes wet but resolute. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in under the weight of truth. Layla sat motionless, her hands limp, her face a mask of defeat. Victor was a shadow, his charm extinguished, his exit blocked by the eyes of a crowd that now saw him for what he was. Emily's hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch, and I knew we were in this together. The gala had become a battlefield, and while Layla and Victor had fired the first shots, I was the one still standing. The chandelier light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the Seattle estate, as if the room itself was mourning the death of the illusion Layla had crafted. Her confession, Victor's exposure, and Emily's defiance had stripped the gala bare, leaving only the raw wreckage of a family betrayed. Layla sat crumpled in her chair, her emerald gown a faded echo of the confidence she'd worn hours ago, her necklace now a chain binding her to her mistakes. Victor, his silver hair disheveled, stood isolated, a man whose charm had evaporated under the weight of truth. Emily stood beside me, her presence a quiet strength, and I felt the air shift, not with rage, but with the clarity of a chapter closing. I set my whiskey glass down, the soft clink a final note in the symphony of our unraveling. The guests, their faces etched with unease, were no longer a festive crowd but a jury that had reached its verdict. Their whispers had faded, replaced by a reverent silence, as if they sensed the gravity of what came next. I looked at Layla, not with the anger she might have expected, but with a calm finality. "You wanted truth tonight," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the hall. "You got it, but it's not the story you thought you'd tell." Layla's eyes met mine, glassy and hollow, searching for a way to reclaim the narrative she'd lost. "Thomas, I didn't mean for this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing." I tilted my head, my smile faint but sharp. "The right thing? You invited a con man to our daughter's life, to our home, because you wanted to rewrite your guilt. That's not truth, Layla. That's selfishness." Emily's hand tightened briefly on my arm, a silent agreement. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on her mother, her voice low but resolute. "You didn't protect me," she said, each word deliberate, like a brick in a wall she was building between them. "You protected your secrets. You waited 30 years to clear your conscience, and you chose this night in front of everyone to do it. You didn't give me truth. You took my family from me." Layla flinched, her hands trembling in her lap, and for the first time, I saw something like remorse flicker across her face. But it was too late. The crowd, once her audience, now turned away, their eyes avoiding hers, their sympathy spent. A woman near the fireplace set her glass down and slipped out, her husband following, their footsteps soft but final. Others followed, a slow exodus, leaving behind only the weight of their judgment. I turned to Victor, who stood like a man waiting for the gallows. "You," I said, my tone cold, precise, "thought you could slide back into our lives, use Emily's success to polish your tarnished name. You're not a father. You're a parasite." His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at Layla, perhaps hoping for an ally, but she was staring at the floor, lost in the ruins of her own making. "Get out," I said, my voice low but unyielding. "And don't come back. Seattle's done with you." Victor hesitated, his hands clenching, then nodded once, a defeated jerk of his head. He grabbed his coat from a nearby chair and slipped toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the hollow hall. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The door clicked shut behind him, a sound as final as a slammed book. I looked at Emily, her face a mix of grief and resolve. "Dad," she said softly, the word a tether pulling me back to the life we'd built. "I'm sorry for all of this." I shook my head, my hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "You don't apologize for her choices. You're my daughter, Emily. Always have been. Always will be." Her eyes welled, But she nodded, her jaw tight, and I knew we'd weather this together. I turned to Layla one last time. She sat alone, the table before her littered with the documents that had undone her. Bank records, notes, proof of a life built on lies. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice calm, final. "You chose your truth, Layla. Live with it." She didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at the papers as if they might rewrite themselves. I didn't need her to speak. Her silence was answer enough. The remaining guests drifted out, their murmurs soft, their glances fleeting. The jazz quartet packed up, their instruments clattering faintly, and the fireplace dimmed to embers, casting the room in a fading glow. Emily and I walked toward the exit, side by side, our steps steady on the hardwood. I glanced at the framed photos Layla had hung for the gala. Smiling snapshots of our marriage, curated lies masquerading as memories. They meant nothing now. The cold Seattle air hit us as we stepped outside, crisp and cleansing, the stars piercing through the night above Puget Sound. Emily paused, her breath visible in the chill. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. I looked at her, my daughter, my anchor, and felt a spark of something new. Not anger, not pain, but possibility. "We start over," I said. "Just you and me." We walked to my car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and I didn't look back. Layla's world had collapsed inside that estate, but mine was just beginning. 30 years of living in her story had ended tonight. I wasn't just closing the book. I was writing a new one, and this time, I held the pen. A month later, Emily and I sat in a small cafe overlooking the Sound, sketching plans for a community center she'd designed, a project we'd fund together. The sun glinted off the water, and her laugh, free and unguarded, reminded me of the girl who'd once chased kites in our backyard. Layla's name rarely came up. She'd moved to a smaller apartment, her social circle shrunk to shadows. Victor had vanished, rumors swirling of legal troubles in another state. The past was gone, and what lay ahead was ours to build.